ce știm noi din vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea ni lege și ni scut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Cuvinte le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce înseamnă, ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. как хозяин необъятной родины своей. Тут жизнь невольна и широка, точно Волга полная течет. Молодым везде у нас дорога, старикам везде у нас почет. Никто у нас не лишний, по заслугам каждый награжден. Золотыми буквами мы пишем всенародный сталинский закон. Этих слов величие и славу никакие годы не сотрут. Человек всегда имеет право на учение, подвиг и на труд. Весенний ветер веет, каждым днем все радостнее жить. И никто на свете не умеет лучше нас смеяться и любить. Но сурово брови мы насупим, если враг захочет нас сломать. Как невесту родину мы любим, бережем, как ласковую мать. Rasti sretna da svi narodi vide, sa strana svih, sa juga i sjevera, kako se rađa i kako se voli, kako se brani zemlja proletera. Rasti cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, srce Tita, rasti cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srce Tita. Sreći u vodi i u zraku, u pjesmi strojeva i u sjaju žita. Rasti i cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Rasti i cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode,
Hello everybody and welcome. It's the evening of the 7th of June 2025 and here we are again and we're talking about one of our recurring subject, which is the nature of the state, the nature of bourgeois rule. But we're going to be discussing this in the context of the now very popular talking point, which is, or should we say, phrase which is used, which is deep state, which is on the lips of everybody, particularly in the United States. And we're going to be exploring a little bit about what this term means, what it doesn't mean, and what it in actuality conceals. Now, the case I'm going to make here is that the set of institutions that are generally referred to as the deep state in the United States. So what does that refer to? That refers to secret police agencies and intelligence services. So FBI, NSA, CIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, ATF, the various other Department of Homeland Security, the various other alphabet soup of agencies which essentially make up this vast intelligence and security apparatus that the U.S. federal government relies upon to keep order, to keep the bourgeois order in play, or secure, if you will. And that's what, when people hear that term, it's what a lot of them generally imagine, that this is the secret intelligence services, the police state, the secret police services of the US and other nations in the West that are staffed by people who are always there, no matter which party is in office, no matter which president is in office, and a wider state bureaucracy which is also unchanging. And that's the most sort of generally understood conception of it. And the fact that it's become a talking point of the likes of Trump and his followers points to the fact that there is a growing crisis, certainly within the US and other imperialist nations, with regard to legitimacy. Because what now almost everybody with a functioning brain has noticed is that administrations and politicians come and go, and yet nothing changes. And even very mild change is defeated via bureaucratic obstinacy, via reforming politicians subverted or disgraced in manufactured or real scandals that are brought out of a particularly nasty closet when the ruling class feels like they need them. And so people start to look for ideas that can explain why it is that no matter which party or which politician holds office, that the same set of priorities get acted upon, and it isn't their priorities, it isn't the priorities of the regular working class American or resident of perfidious Albion or Frenchman or Italian. And so this concept has become more common currency, and it's become commonly used amongst like people in the generally referred to as the MAGA group in the United States. And also it's become used by liberals, but in the sense that the liberals say, yes, there is a deep state, and yes, it's good because it's preventing the evil Trump from subverting democracy. And of course, the usage of democracy like that is quite interesting, because it's another term which, when it's used like that, it reveals its class nature. Remember the old phrase of Lenin's, whenever anybody says democracy, ask for whom. And so when you've got like the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times moaning about things like the Sheinbaum-headed government in Mexico bringing in the election of judges, and you have the Wall Street Journal moaning that this is an assault on democracy, what that generally means is it's an assault on bourgeois rule, because they have presented so-called democracy this way for so long that they are used to getting away with this by now. And what they're used to getting away with is the presentation of it as the only sole definition. The only sole definition of democracy is bourgeois democracy. But they, of course, don't use the bourgeois term. And they regard any any move against the power of the Mexican ruling class or their own power. They regard that as a horrible assault on democracy itself, because to them, democracy is a synonym for the rule of the bourgeoisie. That's basically it. So that's an interesting side point that we'll come back to later. But let's start talking about this phrase "deep state." It originates not in the United States. It originates really in Europe in the 60s and the 70s, and the reference was made to particularly like the Greek permanent state, but mostly it was a reference to the Italian state. And the Italian state after World War II was meant to have been denazified, of course, but of course this isn't something that actually happened. What happened was an awful lot of World War II and before era Mussolini aligned fascist operatives managed to cling on without much difficulty, really, inside the new Italian Republic, and were working closely with the CIA and MI6 and in the early period of the formation of NATO to make sure, basically, that they had a guarantee against the straying of the Italian Republic into socialist territory, which is what really, when we're talking about the deep state in its original form, that was what it was designed to do. It was designed to, in Italy, to create a set of institutions beyond the parliaments, beyond elections, beyond any remote amount of democratic control, that would be unchanging and committed solely to maintaining Italian capitalism and maintaining the new Italian Republic as a secure outpost of U.S. imperialism, and that even if the Communist Party of Italy did manage to win an election outright, despite the fact that all the rigging that goes on went on in Italy against the PCI. If they were able to win an election outright somehow, that the Italian ruling class would have various means at their disposal to stop any move forward from the towards a socialist change. And this meant, of course, the employment of fascists in the security services and a wider network of Italian fascistic paramilitaries, which we were linked to this thing called the P2 Lodge, which is a Masonic lodge that operated in Italy, which had most of the members of the Italian political elite within it. People like Silvio Berlusconi was a member, Julio Andreotti was a member, and this also contained many fascists, operatives, military men, people from the judiciary, senior police officers, and mafia men as well. And so this Italian version of the deep state contained the permanent civil service bureaucracy, the special bodies of armed men that Lenin referred to in State and Revolution, which is police, army, navy, air force, various intelligence services, prison guards, etc. The club of the state, the club that the state hits you over the head with. And then more widely than that, then you have the other sources of bourgeois power, which include organized crime, which include paramilitary operations, which are aligned with, of course, Operation Gladio, which wasn't just an Italian operation. It was a Europe-wide and Britain-wide operation in which MI6 was an absolutely crucial player. Go back onto the YouTube channel and see the old BBC documentaries I've downloaded and I've put on there for you to view, because that's an interesting way to view the Operation Gladio. Again, not just an Italian thing. It was Italy became famous for it because it was the war that was waged there against the organized working class, against the Italian Communist Party, was so violent and went on for so long throughout what Italians refer to as the years of lead, that it became notorious, and also that Andreotti, in one of his last periods in government, admitted to a lot of this. He admitted to the existence of the P2 Lodge. He admitted to the operations run by the Italian security services, fascist paramilitary mobs, and the mafia. And this was all part of one sometimes cohesive, sometimes not so cohesive network that would operated in Italy during the Cold War period. And the aim was to keep the Italian Communist Party out of power at all costs. And if that meant terrorism campaigns, if that meant false flag operations, kidnap, murder, destabilization operations, the whole thing, this was what they would do. And it wasn't just in Italy, but that was one of the most violent places in Western Europe when it comes to political violence in the 60s and 70s. And the aim was to destroy the Italian Communist Party. And eventually, the Italian Communist Party, under all this pressure, elected a liquidationist leadership under the influence of the Gorbachevites and liquidated itself. So in a certain sense, the campaign in the end did work. And and more broadly, it's not just about, it doesn't just refer to Italy, also refers to places like Turkey, where the US and the British helped to set up a Turkish permanent state, Turkish deep state, that would operate throughout Turkey for the entirety of the Cold War period, making sure that the Turkish left remained suppressed, often very violently, running again fascist paramilitary organizations throughout Turkey in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, arguably up to today. And again, the aim was to smash any Turkish communist group that came close to being able to organize on a nationwide basis, organize any kind of challenge to the Turkish ruling class and to the broader alignment of Turkey within the US-led bloc. So this is where it comes from, ultimately. That's where the phrase comes from. Now, what it relates to, though, on a deeper level, is that a lot of people, a lot of workers in the United States and other countries now can see, as I said in the introduction, that they elect various different politicians of nominally differing hues and beliefs, but nothing changes. As Vladimir Putin observed with the presidents of the United States, presidents come and go, but the policy never changes. And that's true for not just foreign policy, it's true for everything. It's true for everything. And people are starting to realize this now, because the ability of the system to make real concessions has gone or disappeared a long time ago. And so their lives get worse. And no matter who they elect, it doesn't seem to matter. And so they start to notice this certain continuity and look around for theories that help them understand this. And what people are starting to see, although that they are, of course, many workers aren't versed in or aren't familiar with the weapon that is Marxism-Leninism, the weapon that they will need to become familiar with to secure their liberation. But what they're groping towards, many workers are groping towards now, is this realization that this talk of democracy that you get hammered into your head every day at school, at college, university, and from the television, radio, all over the internet, this thing that they call democracy is nothing of the kind. And it is essentially merely a mask, an elaborate mask for the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. And again, people are starting to notice that. And so what the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie is, I mean, we've talked a lot on this channel about the dictatorship of the proletariat. It is the dictatorship of a tiny minority who own and control the means of production. In the Western nations, as you discover if you read works like Lenin's State and Revolution and Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, you start to understand the formation of the ruling class in the imperialist nations. These are the monopolists. These are the people with the big shareholdings in the major corporations. These are the people who own through shareholdings and through holding companies all the important industry, all the important land, all the important means of production, both in a country and through their shareholding globally as well, who make a living not by producing anything, but by, as Lenin put it, clipping their coupons. This is the bourgeoisie. These are the people who rise to power, many of them as industrialists, as industrial bourgeoisie, merge with the financial bourgeoisie and create finance capital in the period of monopoly capitalism, in the period of imperialism, as Lenin referred to it as. And they, as Marx and Engels observed in numerous works, but starting with the German ideology, the ruling ideas of any epoch are the ideas of the ruling class. And the state, as Marx and Engels put it in the Communist Manifesto, is a managing committee for the affairs of the entire ruling class. The state emerges, and the state under capitalism is a means by which the conditions for the continuing private ownership of the means of production and for capitalist appropriation, those conditions are created and safeguarded and recreated. And the rule of the bourgeoisie is both enforced and legitimated. Now, it's enforced via the methods of the policeman's club and the gun, but also by the court system and the prisons. This is just dealing with brute force at the moment. We'll get onto ideology in just a second. But it is enforced that way. But it also requires a certain amount of legitimation. It's not like the old days where you could just say that this is designed by God, and therefore everyone, all you workers, shut the hell up. God did this. Given that the bourgeoisie, against its sometimes its own intentions, ushers in an age of rationality and inquiry into the nature of things and scientific inquiry, you need to legitimize yourself. And you also need to make sure that the anger and rage of the proletariat that you have gathered in the vast cities to labor for you is dispersed and dissipated somehow. And so this is why they find themselves in a position that they need to actually make some concessions that appear to be democratic, that give the working class the vote, slowly but surely over the course of the later 19th century. But at the same time, as we pointed out before here, you then make sure you move the important decision-making centers away from anywhere where the working class could exercise any tiny amount of influence. And this is where we get to the hiding of power and what the nature of the bourgeois dictatorship actually is. So it's not just that the bourgeoisie owns the politicians, even though they largely do. It's not just that. It's that power, real power, the ability to actually make a decision and have it implemented, lies outside of the elected institutions of bourgeois democracy. It lies outside of Congress. It lies outside of the Senate, the House of Commons, the House of Lords, the Chamber of Deputies, the Assemblée Nationale. It's in, again, the permanent bureaucracy, the civil service. It's in British terms, the Bank of England, or in American terms, the Federal Reserve. It's in the hierarchy of the military, the top of the military. It's in the hierarchy of the intelligence services. It's in also in institutions which are to do with legitimation. Now, we talked about the bourgeoisie having to make concessions to legitimate themselves, but they also, because the ideas of any epoch are the ideas of the ruling class, they also have to work a hell of a lot on creating bourgeois ideology. And bourgeois ideology is, of course, it's rooted in the bourgeois control of the means of production, but it also then has to be created and recreated using various different methods. So it's not just, using crude state propaganda, even though they do use crude state propaganda. They also use more sophisticated means. So they use academia, they use think tanks, which the bourgeoisie pays for. They use various different hired guns, shall we say, professors, journalists, TV talking heads, to create and recreate bourgeois ideology. And that doesn't just come in the form of an email in your inbox if you start at like the BBC or CNN saying create and recreate bourgeois ideology. Well, sometimes you might get one like that, I don't know. But what how the bourgeoisie keeps ideological control over these institutions is, first of all, they control the money that bankrolls them. So if you control the money, you can control pretty much what anybody thinks in there. But also, and this is where we get to the whole base superstructure thing, the base of society is the capitalist mode of production in its imperialist phase in Britain and the United States. So that's the root of everything. But it doesn't mean that the stems that come out of that and then the tree that grows from it is not important in terms of feeding back down into the roots, if we're going to use the tree analogy. Meaning that the organizational culture of these institutions of the state and institutions responsible for disseminating ideology, these are all really important things to actually control. These are all really important things to make sure that you institute the right form of culture inside these different institutions. So this is why the bourgeoisie spends so much time on so much money on like creating things like management consultancy services, on like human resource management, on how to manage individuals in this system to make sure that A, you get the most out of them, and also B, that they remain under control. So have you ever been in a situation where I used to work in the British civil service, and you run into occasionally, particularly because I was doing trade union work, you run into people in the management structure who will literally tell you that they disagree with everything that is going on, and then they'll go into a meeting with them and they will argue for the thing that they say they disagree with because well, it's my job, well, or I'd lose my job, or I've got to feed my kids somehow, etc., etc. So even if you've got people within there who completely disagree with even the purpose of the organization, through your management of them, you can get people to work directly, often against the interests of their own class. So the management and culture of organizations is important, which is why the bourgeoisie invests so much in creating different management structures that enable them to get the most out of their employees and maintain rigid ideological control within these organizations. And more broadly, look at the culture industry, to use a phrase from somebody I don't necessarily like very much, which is Adorno, the Adorno-Horkheimer phrase. The culture industry is portrayed as something which is like a sort of this naturally growing, innovative thing, which is just part of the wonderful free exchange of ideas of capitalism. In actual fact, the culture industry in the United States and in Britain and in the rest of Western Europe is absolutely rigidly controlled by the ruling class. And here we get back to the nature of the bourgeois dictatorship. The bourgeois dictatorship is not just, some guy, some bourgeois in a top hat with a monocle in, ordering his proles around. The bourgeois dictatorship isn't just the state; it's the dictatorship of a class, meaning it's their control of the means of production. Gives them control of the state. The state is used as a means by which they manage their affairs, and more broadly, they have control over ideological production and reproduction via, as I said, universities, think tanks, etc., NGOs, but also, very importantly, through the entertainment industry, via the making of computer games, via the making of movies, via the making of TV series, and now like in various different pieces of content that go on the internet. The Grey Zone reported a few years ago about how the British intelligence services were paying so-called influencers to actually go out there and literally like run influence operations for them. And a lot of the so-called content you see online has the hand of the bourgeoisie in it, somewhere or another, or so their institutions in it. But let's deal with like the Hollywood and the entertainment industry. There's been a lot of work done over the last few years to trace just how much influence state institutions themselves have over movie production, particularly like the wretched Marvel movies, and the involvement of both the Pentagon and the CIA in the production of those, but also things like Modern Warfare, the computer game series, the other video games that require the cooperation of the American government by either the American military or the American intelligence services. It's a very, very all-encompassing operation. So that if you think of it this way, the bourgeois dictatorship, because it controls all of the culture industry, or the overwhelming majority of it, there's like tiny numbers of independent producers, but most of it is controlled by the bourgeoisie. So you see what you see from the moment that you are born, the moment that you come into this world, you're bombarded with the culture that they produce, which has bourgeois values underpinning all of it. No matter what the writer of an individual piece of culture thinks, most people, and this is where I'm going to use a Zizek phrase, I'm going to do the Zizek impression. It is ideology at its purest, what, and it's a good phrase actually. Ideology at its purest doesn't require the person to think about it. That's the thing. Ideology at its purest is the unthinking assumption. It is the automatic response. So somebody can write a TV drama that goes on, like, I don't know, Netflix, HBO, something like that. And it can be like the most poisonous bourgeois propaganda you can possibly imagine. But they might not even be aware that that's what they're writing. They might not be aware that's what they're writing. Now, some of them might be. Some of them might be absolutely aware that that's what they're doing. They might be absolutely aware that they are paid to do this kind of propaganda, but others will not. And this is where we say ideology at its purest. Ideology at its purest, as I said, is the unthinking assumption. So you don't even have to tell somebody to write bourgeois propaganda. They just do it because you are soaked in this stuff from the day that you are born. Your earliest possible influences, again, whether your parents know that that's what they're doing or not, that they give you a good dose of bourgeois values because that's the society they grew up in. Everything you see on TV, everything you hear on the radio, every film you ever see, especially these days where there's no counter narratives permitted at all, because the source of counter narratives was the old Soviet Union for a long time, and when that disappeared, the center of global revolution disappeared as well. So you have those of us born since the early 1980s have grown up with pure, absolute, undiluted, uninterrupted bourgeois propaganda being drummed into us over and over and over again, often from writers who don't even understand that that's what they're doing. And that is like the system of what Gramsci referred to as the earthworks of the ruling class. So you can create ideological barriers for people who might not even know that they're building ideological barriers. So you face this when you're trying to talk about communism and the need to actually overthrow the system to people. People will often, these are intelligent people who are working class, will often agree with you that the system is shit and it doesn't work for them. And they know it doesn't work for them because despite all the bullshit they're told, they can see that their money disappears as soon as it comes in, that they're poorer than their parents were, that life is getting worse for them and will be worse for their children. They know all of this, but there is a mental block there for so many people that they can't imagine a different society. And again, I'm going to go back to Zizek again because he has written about this. He made a good point, which is that it is easier to imagine the end of human civilization than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. Now, he fucked that up in the book. I think it was called the End Times or something, because his politics are shit and he wandered off into a dead end. But the point is that the bourgeoisie, since the late 80s, has gone down the route of, to use Margaret Thatcher's phrase, there is no alternative. And what that means is that they have deliberately fostered an idea in everybody's head that there is, not only is there no alternative, there's no possibility of changing course, even when everything is obviously going wrong. Even when everything is obviously going wrong, they still want you to believe that there is absolutely no possibility of change. And so this is why you get apocalyptic culture produced, because it's easier, and it's also it's good for the bourgeoisie to produce stuff which is utterly nihilistic and despondent and demoralizing, because what it does is it reinforces that idea that it's easier to imagine the apocalypse than it is to imagine ever breaking out of capitalism, breaking away from it. And that's one of the things that they want you to believe, that there can be absolutely no possibility of change, even at the point of annihilation, even at the point of system collapse. They would rather you went off and become a doomsday prepper than actually read Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, Mao, etc., and actually got yourself to the point, got educated yourself and organized yourselves to the point of joining a communist party and building a means by which the working class could properly fight back. They'd rather you invested in apocalypse porn. That's what they would rather do. So going back to the concept of the deep state and the bourgeois dictatorship. Now, the bourgeois dictatorship consists of these institutions, which I've talked about, the direct institutions of violence. So cops, army, navy, air force, prisons, various intelligence services, the various fascist militias who have, shall we say, an interesting, sometimes arm's length relationship with the intelligence services and the police. You have the mafia and organized crime operations, which often act as adjuncts of the state as well. So that's your organizations of bureaucratic, allegedly legitimated violence on one hand. You have the unofficial organizations of violence included in that as well. Fascist paramilitary groups, organized crime, etc. So you have the direct club arm of the state on the one hand, and you have the ideological arm on the other, which is dedicated towards demoralizing you and pacifying you to the point where they don't need to bring out the baton, because they've already demoralized you to the point where you're just sat in a fucking chair all day depressed. And that's like the reason why they sink so much money into ideological production, because that if they do it well enough, they can completely demoralize people via that system, particularly people who are not exposed to communist ideas, who aren't able to join a decently organized communist party, who spend a lot of their time either at work or just online and just cut off from like the wider working class and cut off from working class politics. You can effectively demoralize people who literally live in the pods and eat the bugs, to use a phrase of Klaus Schwab. So there's two arms of this. There's two arms of this power. And this power that you don't see it operating usually, because a lot of it is just disguised as business. And so and again, like somebody mentioned in the comments, that a lot of like the American so-called deep state is privatized or semi-privatized now. And this is true. But again, that's like further illustrates the point I'm making here about the bourgeois dictatorship. The fact that they privatize and outsource a lot of the stuff, first of all, points to the sheer parasitism of the system, profiting from outsourcing and privatizing like the surveillance of American citizens and British citizens. But also, it's like the fact is that the bourgeois dictatorship doesn't need to be operated by the state. They can be operated by nominally private institutions. The reason why they like to have the state do a lot of this stuff is because the state can legitimate it. So like if a private company is doing shitloads of surveillance and gathering data on American citizens, that's creepy. That's like something out of a 1970s paranoia movie when there was more creative freedom in the United States. But if it's done by ultimately under contract from the FBI or the NSA or the DIA, and it's done legitimately under the Patriot Act, under a warrant from a FISA court or something, then that contains within it enough legitimacy to make your average liberal go, well, okay, as long as it's against somebody I don't like, or not notice it at all. So the private element has to be still legitimated by the public element. And so, but the bourgeoisie don't mind things being done via the private sector because A, it makes money, and B, that's the effectiveness of the bourgeois dictatorship is still there, remember, no matter who runs it. So this is the nature of things today, which is you have in the United States and in Britain and in the imperialist countries, you have the state itself is actually nominally smaller than it has been for a while in terms of the number of people it employs and the amount of stuff it actually does. But the privatized surveillance systems and privatized law enforcement elements stretch much further. State-funded institutions of ideological production and reproduction stretch much further. Ruling class funded institutions of ideological production and reproduction stretch much further still. And so this network of institutions and private companies and various different like movie production studios, video game production studios, all of which the private element of which all trace back to being like owned by the same group of monopolies whose personnel are interwoven with the institutions of the bourgeois state. And this is the bourgeois dictatorship operating. And so the average person, the average worker, is reaching the point now where he or she can perceive that there is power out there which goes far beyond the halls of Congress, the Senate, House of Commons, House of Lords, as Assemblée Nationale, etc. But they can't see fully what that means. They can't understand the nature they don't understand at the moment the true nature of the state. So they grasp at like these talking points about like the deep state, etc. But again, that only gives you a partial truth. I hate to use the old Plato cave analogy, but like there's various stages of waking up to the realities of the world. So the initial the analogy of the Plato's cave analogy is that the watchers at the bottom of a cave system are seeing shadows on a wall made by people holding up objects in front of a light that's behind them. So they see shadows, but the shadows themselves aren't even real. They're not. They're just of objects being held up by somebody else. And then you turn around, and you get free, and then you realize that the things you're seeing are literally like shadow puppet theater. And then you slowly climb through the cave system and out into the open, and then you start to fully comprehend things. And Plato, of course, was a very wise man because, of course, that is exactly the right analogy for our situation. So when you spend a lot of your time looking at shadows playing out on a wall, and that's like most of like bourgeois news and infotainment, etc. That's what that is. It's shadow puppets. It's reflecting. Look at it, the shadows you see in front of you aren't even reflective of real things. They're reflective of objects being used to impersonate real things. And then slowly you emerge and you start to realize that that is not real. So a lot of people have started to realize that the shadow puppet routine isn't real, but they haven't reached the next stage yet, which is understanding the true nature of state power. And behind it, that state power is merely one aspect of a much bigger bourgeois dictatorship, the dictatorship of a tiny number of people who, through controlling immense amounts of capital, can control the state and all these different institutions that are needed to enforce their dictatorship. Now, of course, they will never call it that. And it's only when I actually became a Marxist-Leninist that I started to see this term, bourgeois dictatorship or dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, because in Trotskyite literature, it isn't present. In anarchist literature, it isn't present. And I've read extensively in both. It's only Marxism-Leninism that will tell you properly and give you the proper understanding that we do live in a dictatorship. It's a dictatorship of a class, a tiny number of people who employ a much larger number of people to make sure that their rule gets reproduced time after time after time. But and what we've got to understand is that the number of the bourgeoisie is also it's always very, very small, but they have a much, much, much wider network of people who are very well remunerated servants of theirs who work in their interests. And that's one of the things we've got to bear in mind. So the deep state and the fact that the term has become popular shows that large numbers of people in the United States and other places are waking up to the fact that nothing ever really changes in their interests. Somebody else's interests are always being served. Various politicians who proclaim that they would do X, Y, and Z, whether it's Barack Obama, Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump, etc., promise a lot and deliver absolutely nothing and are unable to deliver anything. And people are starting to realize that there are other forces in play that are always there, regardless of what election is held or what verdict comes through in that election. But we need to, of course, build our communist parties in the United States and Britain and elsewhere to take the proper message to the organized work, to the working class, that yes, you're right, there are forces out there which are preventing change, but there is a broader understanding and a deeper understanding to be had and to fully embrace before you can actually start to understand why it is that nothing ever changes in our interests. All right, so let's see here. Okay, let's have a look at some questions and comments. Okay, so hello to Sputnik56. Hello to Exodus. And hello to Jenny, our moderator, over on YouTube. Hello to David King. Hello to Dingo Ate Me Baby. Hello to James Goblin out there in the Watching Future Yugoslavia. Hello to Exodus. Thanks for sharing that on the Midwestern Marxism Discord. Hello to David Ball. Almir in the Watching Future Socialist Republic of Slovenia, Yugoslavia. J.R. Shield. We've also got Abtin, Agricola, Matt Parker, Nemo, Kais, Alan Smith, Abtin again, Exodus, A-Name, Dan Lindstrom, Mo1917, Agricola only likes streams with the Trump impression. Now, why on earth would you say that? The guy's losing his mind. He's crazy. But then again, he did call Merz a Nazi. He said that the defeat of the Nazis have been very awkward for you. Very awkward indeed. It was awkward for me too. That Hitler had a great golf game. So Holger Ritter, Robert Hand from Gainesville, Florida. Jerry, James Graham, Heidi from Edinburgh. I'll be over in Edinburgh tomorrow, in actual fact. Hello to Why I Ain't Cool, Char Paul, Sputnik 56, Songs 4K, Svetlana, TG Wilson, Grassy Knoll. Who else we got here? Gonzalo Cabrera from Madrid, Wicked Witch of the Southeast. We've got also a comment from Almir who says, Italian elite loves to use fascists against immigrants naturally, also against Slovenians in the border areas in the Trieste and Gorizia area. Yeah, they always bear in mind that the fascists are very often, of course, paid for by various members of the bourgeoisie, and also nearly always, in fact, I'm going to say always, have a relationship with the forces of the state. Some of them are members of the state forces. Some of them are sometime or always agents of the state forces. Fascists act as the enforcers of the bourgeoisie, no matter what the individual fascist thinks he's doing. Song 4K says, Italy exposed how NATO depended on the deep state, was required to steer the public state democracy by covert means. That's true. Alan says, didn't fascists blow up a train station and blame capitalists? Learned about false flags from Alex Jones and George Lucas. They blamed the communists. The fascists did all kinds of stuff in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I think what you're referring to, Alan, is the bombing of Bologna train station, which I believe was in 1980. That was a fascist and organized crime operation, which they, again, the idea was to blame it on the communists. Hello to DE in Hampshire. Hello to Jay. And Agricola says the Godfather series is valuable for understanding what the real mindset of the imperialist is, held up by a flexible number of moral principles and faith that can, of course, be thrown out during war. Very interesting. Sputnik 56 says, never forget Mark Carney, former Bank of England head, now magically became PM of Canada out of nowhere despite being a former British banker. Democracy. Well, you can move between jobs in the imperialist bloc with no barrier to you becoming PM of Canada if you've been governor of a central bank in Britain, given that Britain still retains a gigantic amount of influence in Canada. Never underestimate the power of the British bourgeoisie. This is one of the things we're trying to do with the Decline and Fall series, which is to illustrate that the dismissal of the British ruling class as not important anymore is very dangerous, and in fact might have been a meme started by the British ruling class themselves. These people love hiding their power, and they love pretending that they don't have the power that they used to, whilst at the same time exercising a gigantic amount of it. The British might not have India, or you might not be able to walk from Egypt to South Africa all through pink territory on the map anymore, but they very much are still a powerful player in the world. Nobody who has that gigantic amount of capital they've been accumulating for hundreds of years and is able to move it around the world, and he's done that, and he's expert at manipulating contradictions and paying people off, corrupting people, running covert operations of both the violence and the more ideological persuasion. The British ruling class are very, very dangerous and very, very cold-blooded, and will do literally anything to keep their parasitic system afloat and themselves at the top of it. So don't underestimate these people, and don't just dismiss them either. It's very easy to look at like a clown like Starmer and think, well, who the fuck takes him seriously? Well, don't take him seriously, but take his employers seriously. These people are serious, and these people have proven that they will do anything, including mass killings, terrorism, all kinds of shit, to protect themselves and to advance their interests. This is the nature of the beast that we're dealing with here. And if you just dismiss it and pretend that their power has gone away, then you're setting yourself up for failure. Do not underestimate them. Sputnik 56 says there isn't really a deep state, it's just the state. Yes, that's true, but I do feel we should still use the phrase. It's an appealing populist slogan similar to peace, land and bread. Yeah, I think we should use it, but we should explain what it is. That's the thing. And the reality is that it's just the state, which is part of the overall bourgeois dictatorship. Okay, just scrolling through. If I miss a comment or a question on your that you've put in, do let me know via email. Sputnik 56 says, ironically, despite the woke ideals of Frankfurt School and downright CIA garbage, even Horkheimer Adorno would see Sam Smith dressing as a demon or Harry Styles cross-dressing and say, gotcha. Well, much like Zizek, there are interesting things to be gained by looking at Horkheimer, Adorno, etc. Even Marcuse. It's the thing is their politics were dreadful, and they were used by the CIA to attack the Soviet Union. But at the same time, there's stuff to be gained by reading them, and we'll be coming back to some of those characters in later series. Zizek as well. Yes, Almir, you're right. We do have a lot of work to do. Does Zizek have fleas? You better ask him. He certainly has a nose problem. So where are we now? Just going through some more comments here. Jay says, here in the US, the working class in my area is completely addicted to nonsense by design. Beer, the phone, video games. I don't want to go to a union meeting. I want to drink a beer. Well, we've all been there. You're encouraged, if you're a working class person, you're encouraged to be short-sighted and stupid and easily manipulated. That's what we're all encouraged to be like. It takes a long time to get out of that mindset. So as somebody said to me the other day, remember the words of Malcolm X, don't have a go at the people who don't know today what you know, because yesterday you don't know what you know today. We're all on a journey. We're all developing ourselves. We must continue to patiently explain and build our organizations. Marius says, wokes weirdly mirror white nationalists in their conviction that race is actually real beyond social practice and its primary contradiction over class. That's very true. Alan says the bourgeois definition of dictatorship is very super shallow. They think it's a guy with a mustache and a uniform controlling absolutely everything personally. Very true. Just shallow and ridiculous by design, by the way. Absolutely by design. James Graham says that's my motto: never underestimate the power of the ruling class. Very true. Jay says, I wonder how the UK has such a large GDP without producing anything. They produce some things, but nowhere near as much as it would be necessary to have that amount of GDP. Look, the GDP in Britain is produced by like financial engineering, basically, and also by exploiting resources and labor in other countries, and then the money flows back into Britain via the City of London. I mean, this is the thing. Some of the biggest mining companies in the world, like Rio Tinto, these are nominally British, but they have no British operations in terms of mining at all. Their ownership structure is here. Their corporate offices are here, but all of their actual operations are elsewhere. This is like what happens with a lot of the big nominally British companies now. The owners are here. The coupon clippers are here. Their actual operations are all the way around the world, which is like the sort of most advanced form of like a corporation in the imperialist period, which is it has minimal footprint in the home country, but a huge operation all the way around the world. And that's what, and of course, then you also have the banking system based in the City of London. You have all the hedge funds run out of here. This all adds to the nominal GDP, but it doesn't produce anything, not in Britain anyway. It exploits people in other countries all the way around the world now. Mohammed Kaira says, Zinoviev affair is a textbook example of the deep state wielding its power to remove the first Labour government. MI5 have always been a political police force for the establishment, and that's very, very true. Jay says mining companies being one of them, arms companies being like the UK, Britain still produces an awful lot of weaponry. Oil companies like British oil companies like BP and Shell, which is partially British, still produce an awful lot of profit. But the biggest of them the biggest profits that come to the British bourgeoisie come through banking, financial engineering, provision of the so-called service economy, so provision of services to other countries, export of like financial services, management services, etc. It's all intangible stuff, most of it. But you do get a lot. I use the mining companies as an ideal example because they don't have British operations. They have operations everywhere else. But the banks do that too. And the British banking system, a lot of the massive banks have a global reach, and you only see a partial amount of their operations based here. Right. The tragedy is the bourgeois leftist. When he imagines what individual of today they see in everyday life, he or she often imagines a proletarian, but they don't have a clue that they could be seen there too. Why would the US deep state promote desegregation in America or the 60s? What purpose did it serve? How did it serve their interests? Marius has actually answered that and says, partially because communists were using Jim Crow as the very effective propaganda against the US and thus undermining them. American influence in the decolonizing African and Asian countries also prolonged US imperialism to give some non-whites a stake in the system and diffuse socialist politics in those communities. Yeah, and also the advantages of keeping Jim Crow in place had become outweighed by the disadvantages. It was creating instability. It was creating problems for them, domestically speaking. And it was radicalizing a lot of black and white workers as well in both the South and the North of the United States. So that the civil rights movement became much, much more radical as time went on, to the point where you got Martin Luther King basically moving to a position of at least radical reformist socialism by the time he was assassinated. And the fact that he was, when he was assassinated, aiming to start a poor people's campaign that would unite workers across the color barrier, at that point where he was assassinated, and it's no coincidence that he was assassinated then. Just as it's no coincidence that Malcolm X, when he was becoming a leader of potentially a leader of a much more broad movement that went beyond his starting point as one of the black Muslims in the United States, and was becoming a leader of what I would call basically like an anti-colonial nationalist inside the United States, who was prepared to work with communists and various forms of socialist, and could have been the leader of a much broader anti-capitalist movement in the United States. That's the point when Malcolm X was assassinated as well. The same point that Fred Hampton was assassinated. Anybody who has a national platform, which in the United States, which can appeal to both black and white workers, and to overcome those divisions which are deliberately created and recreated by the bourgeoisie, both by, ultra reactionaries and these days by leftists as well. Anybody who can do that is put out of commission pretty damn quick, precisely because, like, the US ruling class still relies on racialist divisions. It's just that what they did was they moved in such a way as to incorporate a black petty bourgeoisie and bourgeoisie within the system, and dropped the overt racialism. The slightly more veiled racialism is still there. The relentless hammering of the black working class is still there, but it's part of a much broader war waged on the entire American proletariat. But the US ruling class still puts a lot of time and energy into making sure racialist ideologies get created and recreated. They do that with fascists, and they do it with the left wingers as well. Those who read Sakai's Settlers and took it seriously, for instance, they serve the purposes of the American state too. Okay, so now I'm going to call it quits for today, because I have to go off and do a few other things, because I got a very packed day tomorrow. But we'll be streaming tomorrow night. Probably going to do the Q&A tomorrow night. So email your questions to the usual address. Thanks to everybody who's tuned in tonight. We have 431 of you watching. Thanks to everybody who supports the show on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. I'll be back with you again tomorrow. But until then, thank you and good night.